Hey friends, welcome to a special edition of the Tennis and Bagels podcast. Today we have Hall of Famer and returning guest of this show, Steve Flink. It's my pleasure to welcome him again. We speak after all the four majors. We've been doing that for the past couple of years, so I thought it'd be awesome to have him on again to talk about the year-end championships of the ATP Finals, the most significant ATP-only event of the year and probably the fifth biggest tournament of the year. So, Steve, how are you?
Good, Vansh. Looking forward to it as always. It's always a pleasure talking tennis with you.
Same here, Steve. So I guess let's start with Novak Djokovic, his year overall, his season, and his capping it off by winning the ATP Finals, obviously for the sixth time. 7 year gap in between having won it since having won it last time in 2015, and now he's equaled Roger Federer for six titles here at this tournament. Now he's won it at three different venues, and went 5-0 this year. So what are some of your highlights of Djokovic in Turin?
Yeah, Vansh, before I get into the highlights, and there were many, I just want to recap a bit for the listeners, and these are things you probably know as well as I do, but I want the listeners to realize I don't think he's wanted this tournament so badly in a long, long time, because as you alluded to, 2015 was when he won his fifth. He was rolling along then. And then he comes back in 16, and he gets to the finals, and he's playing Murray. And that match was to decide who would be number one in the world for the year. So it was a big deal. It was a surprising loss. He didn't play well at all in that final. Murray was first rate, and Murray managed to nose his way past Novak to end that year at number one, deservedly, because it was all on the line in that final. Disappointing loss for Djokovic. Then he was having his injury woes in 17, so forget that. But in 18, he marched into the final without having – we crushed everybody on his way to the finals, and then lost to Zverev, who he'd beaten in the round robin. He loses that final. Little surprising. 19 loses a heartbreaker to Team that kept him out of the semis. 20, up 4-1 in the final set tiebreak. And then it's a very similar loss to Team in 2020 in the semis. And finally, 2021, he plays against Zverev. He played very well coming into the semis. Played a good semi, but he lost a hard-fought three-set semi to Zverev. So you look at that path, and you realize why he was particularly motivated, I think, given that he felt like he probably should have won a couple of those along the way, or certainly might have been in a position to do so. So he comes in this time, having lost that match to Holger Rune, as you know, in that hard-fought close skirmish in Paris that he probably should have won, where he led 3-1, 40-30 third set and got beaten 7-5 in the third. Great effort from Holger Rune. So he came into this championship, I think, really primed. And I remember the first thing he said, Vansh, after the match to Rune, or one of the first interviews after that, he said, "I still like my chances in Turin. I like my chances in Turin." Told you how much he wanted it and how his confidence had not been dented. So highlights. Well, I'd say, let me just recap it briefly, and then we can bounce a few ideas off each other. But he starts off with Tsitsipas, and who he had beaten in a really tough semifinal in Paris before losing to Rune. And there was just one break in the first game of the match. Novak breaks Stefanos, and then eventually wins 6-4, 7-6. He played very well. I don't know if it was his best match of the tournament, but it was a first-class Tsitsipas who served awfully well after that opening game and made it tough. It was a very fast court, as you know, very quick court. So then he plays probably his best match of the week to wipe away Andrei Rublev 4-1, and it was 4-all in the first set, so he won 8 of the last 9 games. He really picked up his returning in that second set. And then the most impressive match to me, one of the most impressive wins of his career, was his seemingly meaningless round-robin clash with Medvedev, who he, as you know, Vansh, he thinks of Medvedev as one of his chief rivals. And obviously Medvedev took away the Grand Slam from him in 2021. They met in 2 Grand Slam finals that year, with Novak winning in Australia and Daniel retaliating in New York. So here they are. It's a match where Medvedev has lost his first 2 round-robin matches himself, both 7-6 in the third. So maybe he wants to come away with a win for sure. Novak has got to be concerned with preserving energy for the weekend. And he almost had that match in straight sets. Won the first set, and he was 2 points away in the tiebreak in the second set at 5-all. And Medvedev forced him into an error on the volley, and eventually, after Medvedev served for the match in the third set, with Novak looking quite uncomfortable physically at times and having trouble breathing, he managed to play a nearly impeccable tiebreak. Played a really good game when Medvedev served for the match, and it was helped by one double from Daniel. And then gets back to 5-all, goes to the tiebreak, doesn't make a single mistake in the tiebreak, wins it 7 points to 2. So I wondered, Vansh, after that win, whether he might have done himself a disservice in some ways to play over 3 hours the day before a much more important semifinal. But he came out, and when the chips were on the line against Taylor, certainly it was, again, not his best tennis against Fritz. I'd say he certainly played better against Rublev, and might have, and I would say in some ways played better against Medvedev. But here he is playing Fritz, who'd had a good week, who'd beaten Ruud to get to the semifinals, and he beat Felix. That's the match that made him qualify for the semis, and he'd lost a heartbreaker to Ruud, and so he was having a good week, Taylor Fritz. And they go to 2 tiebreaks, and Djokovic, when the big points were on the line in both tiebreaks, he came through with flying colors. So he won the first tiebreak 7-5, the second 8-6, and lost his serve once in the first, once in the second. Was a little agitated. You could see again wasn't feeling entirely comfortable. Something was going on. It was a little bit of a mystery. He never really explained it, but it wasn't something that required the trainer or that certainly required him to default. He just plodded on. And then we come to the final, and I thought, again, for the first half of the first set, he looked very concerned about whether physically how well he was going to get through this. But then as the first set progressed, and he saw how easily he was holding, and he never even was pushed to deuce on his serve in 2 sets, then I think he got confident that he could squeeze out a break, and sure enough, he did squeeze out a break at the end of the first set, and it pretty much carried him through. He got one break in the middle of the second set, and he really played a very clean, efficient match and dictated from the baseline and really looked pretty close to the top of his game, I think, of that match. So as you said, 5 matches. In the 5 matches, lost his serve 3 times. Twice against Fritz, once against Medvedev. Nobody else broke him. The other 3 never broke him. Granted, a very fast court, but one of his best serving weeks of the year and possibly of his career. So it couldn't have been a better way for him to cap off the year, Vansh, to sort of say to everybody, I know that Carlos is number 1 this year, and I accept that, and he had a great year, and he's a terrific kid, but I still believe that I'm the best player in the world. When you go out and beat 5 top tenors in the year-end championships, you're going a long way toward demonstrating that conviction is true.
Yeah, I think everything you said there is spot on. And now he also finished the year with the most top 10 wins of anyone, I think, and 11 top 10 wins all year, and same number of titles as Carlos. And he won a title at every level, right? I mean, he won a title at 250, 500, 1,000, a year-end championship, and a major. And he missed 2 majors and 4 Masters 1000s. And I mean, if the Wimbledon points counted right, he would just be 180 points behind Carlos for number 1.
Yeah, no,
so
that was a big deal. And obviously, if he misses 4 Masters 1000s, had he just played anything resembling his normal schedule, played all those hardcore Masters 1000s in the spring and the summer, the 2 in the spring, the 2 in the summer, had he gotten his Wimbledon points, had he just fared reasonably well at the Australian and U.S. Opens, had he been there, he would have been a runaway number 1 in the world. But I don't think he was that concerned about it. He'd gotten his 7th. He finished his 7th year at number 1 in the world, year-end number 1, 7 times at the end of 2021. He had by far the record number of weeks, surpassing Roger by a wide margin. So I don't think that was necessarily his priority, but it just showed you, Vansh, the standard was there. 5 titles, and it could easily have won 6 or 7. Obviously, he should have won in Paris and lost another one to Rublev back home in Serbia that you think he probably would have won if he'd been fully at peak efficiency. So it was a really impressive year for someone whose campaign was so disrupted by the difficulties somewhat imposed upon himself, but not entirely, that not taking the vaccine and therefore not being able to compete in so many places. But it ended on an exceedingly high note.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I also think not having played as many tournaments, I think that also made him a little bit more sharp in his tennis, because he's able to train more. He's able to work on fine-tuning the aspects of his game more the spot serving, the net play, all the different things that make him such a complete player, and ability to win these quick types of points, but also just he doesn't look like he has lost anything physically. 435.5, it doesn't look like it at all.
Not at all. I totally agree, which makes it a little bit of it still kind of mystifies me what happened there. I was happy for him that it never ended up costing him whatever was going on those last 3 days in Turin, starting with the Medvedev match. But it was like it was some kind of a bug, something, because he's so fit. And yet I think he proved it even more beyond a doubt by getting through those matches despite whatever he was battling from within. So it was certainly a very gratifying year for him in the end.
Yeah, just one more thing on the infection or bug thing. This is completely unconfirmed and not from a reliable source, but some people were saying that it may have something to do with an eye infection that he must have had during the week, because there was one changeover or something where he was getting his eyes worked on, and there was a lot of shaking with his hands, and it was very strange.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. He has had issues with the eyes from time to time. That would explain it, because there was certainly no reason for him to be struggling with his breath like that, and obviously he didn't think he had COVID again, and that explanation makes sense to me. The eyes.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I think we covered Djokovic very well, actually. So the one thing I wanted to ask you is, I mean, obviously it's very clear in 2022 there's tier 1 of players, right? There's Djokovic, Nadal, and Alcaraz, and I was thinking about it, and I'm trying not to go for recency bias, because I still believe the player of the year has to be Nadal, having won 2 majors in the fashion that he did it in Australia, from 2-3 love 40 down and 2 sets down in the final against Medvedev. It was so improbable. And then I think Alcaraz is the deserving world number 1. I think Nadal is the player of the year, but I think Djokovic is undoubtedly the best player in the world right now and the favorite for the Australian Open. How do you see those 3?
Yeah, I can't really disagree with anything you've said. You especially if you're in Nadal's or Djokovic's shoes, what do? You don't devalue the other tournaments, but you put a high priority on the majors. So for Rafa to come away with 2, I mean, Novak would have liked to have had 2 instead of 1, obviously, and it didn't happen. And tremendous effort from Rafa, not to mention that he was not in good shape going into the French, and he was very concerned about his foot, and he's getting injections before every match. And he's talking about how he doesn't have any feeling in that foot, or very little feeling. Obviously, it couldn't have been completely numb, or he wouldn't have been able to play. What I think he meant was very little feeling, so it was an odd feeling. But still, to win the Australian after missing virtually the entire second half of 2021 and walk out there with 1 warm-up tournament in Melbourne, a 250, and win that and still win the Australian. As you said, down 2 sets to Medvedev, down 2-3 love 40, down and out, and somehow win 7-5 despite serving for the match at 5-4 and kind of blowing it there. It looked like that could have been really fatal to him when he lost his serve in the 10th game of the 5th. Comes right back in typically pugnacious Nadal fashion and wins 2 games in a row and closes it out. So no, I think you really have to tip your hat to him. You have to tip your hat to Carlos, because he worked for that number 1 ranking, set a very high standard. It was mainly what he did in the spring, and obviously coupled with the U.S. Open triumph, that got him to number 1. He wasn't as consistent in the second half, but he had built up such an advantage by doing so well especially you're starting with winning Miami, semis of Indian Wells, winning Miami, and straight on through the French. It was a good run for him.
Yeah.
So I thought that was terrific. But yes, if you looked at who was really the best, who played the best tennis of the year, when you looked at it in its totality, that was Djokovic. And I think he affirmed that fact in Turin by beating all those players and doing it so convincingly and showing you the full range of his skills.
Yep. Well said. I think, Carlos, it's going to be interesting to see what he does during this offseason, because obviously last year, I mean, it was all about becoming physically a beast, right? And that's what he was able to do. That's how he was able to withstand the 24 hours of tennis that he played across these 2 weeks, and the US Open and numerous other occasions where he just looks like, a veteran who's been on tour for many, many years and can just handle the physical rigors. But now, having gone through the oblique tear and having 6 weeks of recovery from that injury, and that kind of seeping closer and closer to his Australian Open preparations. That is going to be interesting to monitor, right?
Yeah, I really have great sympathy for Carlos because, first of all, he gets injured in Paris there, and that knocks him out of Turin. But not only knocks him out of Turin, puts him way behind in any kind of preparation for Australia. I don't see how he's going to have enough time. He could surprise us. Obviously, if Rafa can do what he did, there's always possibility, but I think it's unlikely that we're going to see the best Carlos until the spring, when he's got a whole bunch of tournaments under his belt. And then by then, we may see some really stellar play from him. I expect we will. You have to feel sorry for the kid. He earned his ranking. He played such great tennis all year long. And then to have that injury occur when it did, and it's one thing to have an off season, but he's going to have to be recuperating and trying to find a way somehow to be physically near 100% by the time the Australian Open starts in mid-January. It's going to be very, very difficult for him, and you have to be empathetic.
Yeah, I agree. One more thing about Nadal that I think easy to forget, that actually his foot seems to be fine now. Like, compared to the things that he was saying, post French Open, right, about the ablation surgery and whatnot. I think it's kind of a positive that he's, the foot doesn't seem to be bothering him at this moment. And I walked away from his ATP finals, not really panicking because it's because of all the different things that has happened the last 6 months and the very few matches that he's played and the ab injury. The serve looked a little bit more back to normal regularly in terms of the speed and the ball toss from what I saw at the US Open. And he picked up that nice win over Rude, again, a player who is very comfortable against and gives him a lot of time. And so, I kind of expected Nadal to not get out of his group. So I think from that standpoint, I think he'll be fine in 2023.
I hope you're right, and I tend to think you're right. I still worry about the foot because I think if you look at his schedule post Roland Garros, the hard path to the semis of Wimbledon, having to default to Kyrgios and playing one match prior to the U.S. Open on hard.
Yeah.
And then managing to sort of get to the fourth round, lose to Tiafoe. Okay, most of those matches were not physically, 2 of the 3 matches along the way were not physically tough. And then a long break again, back in Paris, losing to Tommy Paul. And then the 3 matches, okay. He did play, but he didn't play anything like a full schedule or too many long, taxing matches. But at least within that realm, what we saw, it didn't seem to be a factor at all. I just think that he knows in the back of his mind, he's always wary because he feels like it could crop up at any time unexpectedly and start hurting him again. Let's hope that's not the case because he had enough other injury woes aside from the foot. He does not deserve to have to be battling that again.
Yeah, for sure. What did you think about his ATP finals though, overall? His 3 matches.
Yeah, I agree with your assessment. I didn't expect him to get out of the group. I was a little disappointed in, for instance, when he plays Fritz. It was good first set. He served very well in the first set himself, and obviously Fritz served beautifully, and the court really suited Fritz. The fast court was just to his liking. But then the first point of the tiebreaker, I was watching, I saw the toss go up on the second serve, and I thought, oh, no, don't hit it. It was almost obvious watching just on the television that he was going to double fault, that the toss was off. And that ended up being very costly. And then when he played Felix and lost to Felix, he lost the game in the first set, 3-4. He's up 40-love, and he loses his serve. Starts with 2 doubles out of nowhere, and then ends up losing 40-love, 40-30 with the 2 doubles, eventually gets broken. So there was a few, I thought that was disappointing. On the other hand, Vansh, I was impressed with his attitude about typically professional and prideful. He goes out for the Rude matches if it was going to give him a place in the semifinals. In other words, that winning was going to have that kind of value, which it obviously didn't. And yet he was very pleased to come away with that win and treated it like it meant something to him, which means it does mean something to him. So that there's some encouraging signs that he always finds a way. I always think of Nadal, Vansh, losing to Djokovic in the 2011 U.S. Open final. That was Novak's first great year where he won 3 of the 4 majors. And Rafa had lost the first 2 sets, and he squeezed out a 7-5 third set before losing decisively in the 4th. And he kept talking about it afterwards, how much that meant to him. And I don't know anybody else that would have said that or felt that. They would have been disappointed to go down 6-1 in the fourth, and they wouldn't have been alluding to the fact that they won the third. But then, sure enough, he played Djokovic at the start of the next year and lost the epic Australian Open final, 5 hours, 53 minutes. So you saw that the fact that he felt he had played a really good set at the U.S. Open in the third set, that he had carried it with him. He's got a really positive outlook that way. He always finds an excuse to be optimistic.
Yeah, for sure. I think his positive outlook and attitude in general always seems to serve him well. But someone who did get out of that group was Taylor Fritz. And Taylor Fritz has had a really, really, really impressive rise, I would say, since October of the previous year, since that Indian Wells tournament. And for me, the thing is, I've kind of seen him since 2015, 2016 when he was coming up. And I always thought he had a pretty decent backhand. I always thought that it was pretty good from a ball striking perspective. And I feel like, though, what has changed now is he has improved his explosive movement and is a better athlete in general. So I think maybe that's why people have that impression that the stroke overall has improved. But I actually think the bigger improvement might be his forehand. The ability to, terminate a rally just straight up with the forehand by itself, right? And then, his serve is excellent. It reminds me a little bit of Sampras and just like how fluid the motion is and just how reliable it is. And he seems to be able to hit every single spot with it. And I feel like maybe the backhand is kind of been a little underrated by some people, because I think we're so used to the last 10 years of, the likes of Isner and Querrey and Johnson, players like that who are a little bit more, they are like, serve and forehand centric. So to see someone like Fritz who has serve, forehand, and backhand and has improved those movement and areas, I think it's looking good for American men's tennis.
Yeah, I think you can analyze this game well. I think the forehand has improved. It's not mightily, but significantly. Enough so that it's put him to the next level. You're right. The serve is always looking effortless. He does defend better. There's no doubt about it. He did that quite well in some of the rallies against Novak. Made Novak work hard as a result. He had a good week because he started with the Rafa win. But again, get back to slight disappointment, Rafa did not stay with him in the second set. He didn't quit by any means, but Taylor ran through the second 6-1.
Yeah.
And he finished off Rafa in straight. Then he lost the heartbreaker to Ruud because he was 5-1 down in the last tiebreak and got it back to 6-all. And they had kind of a freakish point where Ruud hit the ball off the net court. Taylor was a little unlucky to lose that match. But then to put it aside as he did, and beat Felix, who many people thought would probably beat him this time, given the way Felix had ended the year with 3 straight titles before losing to Runa in Paris. That was a really good win because Taylor split sets with Felix. And they're on serve all the way in those sets, and 2 tiebreakers, they split them, and then he ends up, running away with the third set. So I thought that was a very good effort for him to qualify against an informed FAA. And then to play 2 tiebreaks with Djokovic. Was it the best Djokovic? No, but it was a very, very good Fritz. Yeah. So yes, to get that place only because Carlos pulls out and make the most of it, I think Taylor is going to feel very good about himself heading into 2023. He has to try to avoid losses like the one to Tracy Austin's son, Brandon Holt at the U.S. Open, because I think he maybe got ahead of himself there. There was all this talk that he might be a candidate to win the title without Djokovic being there, and Rafa, nobody's sure how well he was playing, and it turned out Rafa was vulnerable. That Taylor really kind of thought in the back of his mind he might be able to win this tournament. And so I think that he has to avoid that kind of thing. But boy, it's an encouraging, all told, encouraging year, really encouraging year, and he could threaten for a place in the top 5 in 2023. I could see a possibility there.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you about actually another thing that I'm realizing is that at 5-4 30 all in the second set, he hits a serve and he has a backhand on the first ball, and someone in the crowd just screams, and it's like I think he probably lamented that point a lot because he mentioned it after the match.
We'll never know. You're right. Absolutely big point because he served for the set. Novak and already Djokovic had been down love 30 at 3-5 and squeezed that game out. And now it seems like he's going to get the set point. Probably would have made the shot. We'll never know. But it was terribly unlucky for him that a fan would do that. And these fans sometimes can't help themselves. I don't think anybody did that deliberately to cause any trouble, but it was a hard moment for him. And it's not like there's something in the rules where the umpire can say, we're going to play a left. So, but still, he stayed in there. Yeah, he didn't serve the set out there, and they went to a tie break, and it was an 8-6 tie break. So you can't say that he didn't compete well. I just see mainly very positive signs with him.
Yeah, I agree. And that match against Felix was big because that was a must-win. And, I think he's gotten the better of Felix twice this year because once at the ATP Cup as well. So, but for Felix's case, do you walk away with it feeling slightly disappointed? I mean, or maybe not really, because he won 3 titles and he made the Paris semis, and maybe you can chalk it a little bit up to fatigue, and now he's just won Davis Cup. So, maybe, and it was his first time there, and he's probably going to be there next year as well. So, maybe it's not that disappointing, right?
No, I think all told, it's very good. Yeah, it was definitely disappointing for him. He must have liked his chances pre-tournament to get to the semis and turn at least give himself a shot, and maybe possibly, all best case scenario, win the tournament. And it didn't happen. Yeah, that was disappointing. The Runa loss, he didn't play well there either. But it's understandable after 3 straight titles. But then to bounce back and be the hero in the Davis Cup and play as well as he did, that's a big moment for him and his country, a first ever. And that he'll look back on the end of the year and be very pleased that he won 3 titles in a row, had a win over Djokovic in the Laver Cup, and wins and is instrumental in Canada winning the Davis Cup. Couldn't have asked for too much more than that, and overall a level very, very high. So we've talked about him, Vansh, I know, over the course of this year, and I got to believe that next year I'd be really surprised if we don't at least see him in a Grand Slam final. And I wouldn't be shocked at all if he won one. But I'm expecting him to at least take the step of making it to the final, and that could be the kind of springboard toward winning his first either later in the year or the following year. But I'm expecting that much from him in 2023.
Yeah, I hope you're right, because I'm a big fan of his, just how he conducts himself in general, and just what a leader he's become at such a young age and stuff like that. But I still have questions about how well his game will translate when it goes back to outdoors. And just if he can avoid those early type of losses like he did, at the US Open to Draper or Wimbledon, first round loss there. So just, I feel like when he's playing at his very best, he can be almost untouchable on serve and serve +1, and can just run through points very efficiently. But if he's not having such a great day, and the backhand can sometimes be a little error prone, that's when I sometimes start to doubt how soon it'll come,
Well, those are legitimate concerns, very legitimate. Uncle Tony did address the backhand with him and has told him he has to improve that backhand, no doubt. I'm not as worried as you are, I guess, about the outdoors, having seen him reach the semis of the U.S. Open 2021 and almost beat Medvedev in Australia. I've seen him, and beating Zverev at Wimbledon. I've seen him play some really good matches outdoors and make some good showings at those majors. And the match with Rafa at the French this past year was a beauty. So I feel like, no, he can do it. Where I think you're spot on is where he's got to be careful about those early rounds at the majors, and to treat those opponents as if they're Djokovic or Nadal, or as if it's the final, and be really primed for every single match, and not get upset in the first 3 or 4 rounds, because the deeper he goes, the more dangerous he becomes. But I would like to add one other point. You're so right about him as a person, the character, the way he carries himself, so much dignity. And you see how he's very composed and seldom loses his cool. And then when it's over, he'll yell a little bit and scream, and he's euphoric when it's over. But I just feel like he really is the embodiment of a top class tennis athlete who knows how to handle himself in the arena. I admire him for that immensely. Yeah,
absolutely. And he's also played so many matches and tournaments this year as well, and he's not looked tired at all or any kind of fatigue. I think he played like 27 tournaments and went deep into this year, and most matches of anyone played this year. So it's the whole body of work is looking good, and he's up into 6th in the world. And I think breaking the finals thing was a huge thing, like to get 4 titles and make 5 finals, it's looking good for Felix.
Oh, it is, and I do think he needs to examine his schedule. The better he gets, and the fact that he's now seen he can pull off these titles, you don't want to overplay. If for instance, if he had known that he was going to win all 3 of those tournaments, I think he might have said to himself, "No, I got to save a little bit more for Paris and Turin, and I'm skipping one of those." Yeah. But he couldn't know that going in, and he just got on a roll.
Yeah.
So I think that's something he's going to have to look at in the years ahead, is maybe cutting back slightly on that schedule, because he's going to be winning. He's going to be the kind of guy that wins 60 or more matches every year.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then I guess, we have to talk about Casper Ruud, because, the man made Miami final, Roland Garros final, US Open final, year-end championship final. I mean, made considerable strides this year. I would say is one of the most improved players of the year. I mean, he was 8 last year, finished the year, and he'd already made some strides on hard courts. He had made the semifinals last year, came out of his group, was handled pretty easily, I would say, by Medvedev in the semifinal there. But this year, I would say he really he really made some strides, and I think his backhand has improved. He definitely takes it earlier, hits it flatter. I think he had some mid-season technical change to it, because I remember watching that thing in Miami and even at times on the clay, and I just thought it was a bit too loopy, a bit too spinny at times, and now I feel like it just has more bite. And I think where he gets into some trouble sometimes is versus the very elite, like Djokovic and Alcaraz, because every time he's in these big finals and he has to defend, and he has to go to the slice or to get back to neutral, I feel like all those 3 players have such a good all-court game, and they're just able to finish points with such ease, so they end up getting the better of those exchanges. So that side gets a little bit exposed, but I'd say overall he's really improved quite a bit, don't you think?
Tremendously. And again, I can't quarrel with the word you said. I know that Jim Courier, doing the commentary when Djokovic was playing him in Rome, was offering similar criticisms of the Ruud backhand. There's no doubt that by the U.S. Open, it was much, much better, less vulnerable. And yeah, he is driving through it better. And what impresses me is he's just beginning to understand what he can do on hard courts. He surprised himself by getting to this final. And here he was, in the finals of Miami on hard, finals of the French on clay, finals of the U.S. Open on hard, finals here on hard in Turin. Remarkable. So I think he's beginning to realize that he can do just about as well on hard as he's always done on clay, that he doesn't have to think of himself having a preferred surface anymore. And that's exciting news for him and the sport. He's another one who handles himself. He's the classy gentleman he is. And I thought he was terrific in the way he handled the defeat in the final. And yeah, I mean, it's all very encouraging. The backhand, maybe it's never going to be one of the great backhands, but it's so much less of a weakness. And of course, his forehand is terrific. Problem he has with Djokovic, I think, is that Djokovic kind of challenges him and says, okay, I'm going to go forehand to forehand, and you got to show me that yours is better. And he does that with a lot of guys. That can be a problem. And you're right. And Rafa pummels away at his backhand with his forehand cross court. So yeah, he's going to have some difficulty with them. But there's no reason that he can't do well against just about everybody else and make his mark and stay in the range that he is next year. I could see him having a very similar year. Would it surprise me if he won a major? Yes. I give Felix a better chance somewhere along the line of pulling one off. But it wouldn't surprise me to see him in a bunch of semis and finals of majors. Maybe a couple of semis, maybe a semi and a final, something like that.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think, he did well to hang with Djokovic until 5-all in the first set. Because,
yes.
And then I think 5-6, 30-all, that's when I really saw that pattern play out, because they were going backhand to backhand, and Djokovic felt so confident he could go inside out on his forehand and just kind of run Ruud around from the baseline. And then he just kind of got the error on the set point from the backhand cross and just grew from strength to strength from there. So. Yeah.
And also, Vansh, it's very difficult when your opponent, in this case, we're talking about Djokovic, is holding serve that easily. I mean, you're not even pushing him to deuce. So those service games are flying by, and then you're back under the pressure cooker again immediately. And that, I think, had to be difficult. And it was Djokovic had pinpoint accuracy that day on his serve, and that was important given the way he was feeling. But yeah, I don't know if it's a great matchup for him against Novak. But he'll keep trying. He'll keep beating a lot of other top players. And look what he did to Rublev. Okay, Rublev was a little bit off in the semis, but he just took him apart.
Yeah. Something that I think Ruud could have done a little bit better is attack Djokovic's second serve a little bit more. I think it took a little bit too much of a defense. Just in general in this match, I thought he was a little bit too passive. Just wasn't going after his biggest shot on the court, which is the forehand. I mean, okay, you're not really, I mean, Djokovic's forehand is world class as well, so not too much of an advantage there, but nonetheless, I think he could have used that a little bit better. I think Djokovic's average second serve speed was not super high. It didn't need to be, but, Ruud wasn't doing enough, I don't think, to punish it as much as he would have liked, because he, maybe he might have created a breakpoint chance if that had been the case, but I didn't.
Could be. I just think it's funny, the commentators talk a lot about that. And they hone in a lot on the speeds. But I think what Djokovic does is keep himself out of trouble. Gets a he gets enough spin on it and enough depth that he's basically sort of daring the guys to say, okay, what can you come up with? I don't think you can beat me with a winning return.
Yeah.
I want you to prove to me that you can. And for some reason, Ruud, I think in general, he could be more aggressive on second serve returns, maybe in general. Yeah. But I don't know how well it would necessarily have worked against Novak that day. And I think Djokovic would also have adjusted.
Yeah.
And hit more slice serves and challenged them that way.
Yeah, I think it's a very tricky balance when you're playing someone as complete as Djokovic, because you want to do what's in your identity and what you know best, but you also don't want to play completely out of your comfort zone, because then, then you could lose 2-2, and it's like, so it's very tricky all around, I guess. But it's good news for him is that he's beating pretty much 95% of the players. So
yes, and he had a slump after the Open. He lost 4 out of 6 matches. Understandable, because he got into his second Grand Slam final of the year, and it's a tricky time after the Open to sort of figure out your priorities and try to gear yourself up toward the year-end championships. But it was understandable to have a bit of a lull, but then to come back so strong in Turin was just the tonic he needed.
Yeah. Another player who I have some mixed feelings about in this tournament is Andrei Rublev. I want to give him credit for getting out of his group with Medvedev, Djokovic, and Tsitsipas. I did not think that would happen, but once again, it was a good breakthrough to get to the semis, and I was impressed by his fight and his desire and his comeback against Medvedev from a set down. He's now won his last 2 matches against Medvedev, and it was good this time. There was no such caveat like last time when they played in Cincinnati, and Medvedev kind of ran into a camera, and there was all of that. But none of that this time, and Rublev won it fair and square, and he pulled off that win against Stefanos.
Not only, sorry to interrupt, not only did he win it fair and square, but the psychological blow that he took to have 7 set points get away in the first set, led the set 5-2, served for it, had all those set points in the tiebreak, didn't close it out. I thought it was going to be a 6-2 match at that point. Right. That's where I give him the most credit, that he came back strong, won the second set, and then even when Medvedev came back from 6-3 down and saved a whole bunch of match points again in the third set tiebreak, Rublev didn't panic, and he actually won 3 rallies in that tiebreak.
Over 30 shots, right?
Over 30 shots.
Yeah.
And you never would bank on him doing that against Medvedev. So, I agree with you. There's some signs that are encouraging. On the other hand, then he gets beaten so soundly by Ruud in the semis. It should have been a closer match. At least you would think so. But still, what he takes away is he beat both Medvedev and Tsitsipas, 2 good wins. Yeah. And didn't play badly against Novak. He caught Novak at his best. So, yes, my fear is that he'll stay about where he is for the next 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
He plays a lot. He'll win maybe 3 or 4 titles a year, maybe a 250 here, a 500 there, a couple of 500s. And keep getting his points that way, and keep his ranking up that way, and go to the quarters, maybe the semis of some of the majors, maybe. But I'm not quite sure I can envision him, even with his improved backhand, Vansh. I think his backhand is much better than it was, but he's still just emotionally a little unstable at times. And he gets so upset with himself for missing an easy shot, and he advertises it. When that happens, it's so obvious that he's furious with himself. So I think sometimes he's his own worst enemy.
I think that's the last point is the biggest thing for me.
What's that?
The emotional volatility that you mentioned. It seems to come and go, right? Because against Medvedev and Tsitsipas, we didn't really see that. But then against Djokovic and even at times against Ruud, I mean, it was 2-all 40-15 in the first set. And right from there, once he got broken there, he kind of went away a little bit. And also you saw those emotional and instability again.
You're right. The interesting thing was in the Medvedev match, though, he did actually vent with the umpire. He was really annoyed about a couple of calls.
Yeah.
And he was letting the umpire have it at the changeover. And what amused me about that is he let 7 points get away, and he wants to bicker with the umpire about not the set points. It was about calls earlier in the tiebreak. So he's funny that way, but at least we saw him just get back on the horse that day and start competing again and calm down. Too often he doesn't, and the other players know that about him and expect that of him. So I hope he can conquer that, but that's not easy. That's not an easy habit to break.
Yeah, for sure. And once he beat Tsitsipas in that quarterfinal match, essentially, right? What was this comments that Stefanos made afterwards about his beating him with the few tools that he has. What did you think of that statement? Because on the one hand, I can't say he's completely wrong, but at the same time, it doesn't reflect very well on Stefanos to be saying that after a match that he's lost 6-3 and 6-2 in the last 2 sets, and it just didn't come across very well from his side, right?
Couldn't agree more. It was a little tasteless and unnecessary. Keep that within your camp. Just go back to your father and Mark Philippoussis and say, why would I lose to this guy? I've got much more versatility and so many more tools. What went wrong? And just examine that. But it's not fair to do that to a guy that's just beaten you. And Stefanos is perplexing that way. He comes out with these comments from time to time, and there's parts of him that I really like. And he's interesting, and he's a fun player to watch. But that was not wise, and it was condescending, and also it just gives Rublev the incentive. I've always thought those two are very respectful of each other. Now I think Rublev is going to have a special edge every time he plays against Tsitsipas to say, "Hey, fella, I can beat you again." Why did you say that about me?
Yeah, I thought Rublev's answer in response to that comment was great. He tackled it head on. He was respectful at the same time. And he walked through it like shot by shot. I thought that was pretty neat.
Yeah, he handled it well. He did. You're right.
And just on Stefanos, I heard Jim Courier afterwards in the commentary, and he was talking about how he suggests the Tsitsipas family might need a sort of therapy session because, this thing with him and his father is getting a little out of control. I mean, you saw in that third set, there was many times in that match where it legitimately hampered his focus, like in the middle of the match, because just, constantly, his father is constantly talking to him, and I don't think he wants to hear that advice. Nobody wants to hear that, someone shouting in your, from the corner of your box like that when you're playing such an important match. And, he spiraled out of control a little bit, 2 double faults to give the second break, and just at times he completely went away. And has to be said, obviously, Rublev, I thought, played a very good last 2 sets. He defended his second serve much better than I had thought originally coming in, and, so he deserves credit, but I just think it's not going to work out. It's not working out with Stefanos and his dad right now, and hasn't been.
Well, yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you entirely. I think what's interesting about it is the fact that the tour decided to allow this coaching, in a limited form when you're down the same end as your coach. That could be to Stefanos' detriment for just the reasons you cited. He doesn't want to hear that much. Meantime, I think the guy that knows more about him now and is in a position to help him a lot more is Philippoussis.
Yeah.
So I really think that Stefanos, I honestly believe what he should do is go to his father and say, Dad, I want you to be my father. I don't want you to be my coach. And we can talk about matches when I have a little distance from it over dinner later that night, and I'll be happy to hear what you have to say. But while it's going on, I want Mark to be there, and I want Mark to have the full authority to help me with my game. Because by all accounts, Mark has really helped him a lot with his volleying technique, and he's been quite a good coach. And I think the father should understand, and frankly, his mother is not much better.
Yeah.
If you watch his mother during these matches, and she gets, I'm not saying she's hysterical, but she's very animated in a negative way. And they'll put the camera on her after he's lost a point, and you can tell she's sort of replaying it and criticizing him. Why did you do that? And you can tell that she's also too negative and too much on edge, too hard edged. So both the parents, listen, we can respect the fact of how much they care, how much they want for him, how much they love him. All of that is true. But the best thing they could do, especially his father, would be to step back right now and just give Philippoussis the authority he needs to do the job. And I think Philippoussis would do a fine job for Stefanos Tsitsipas, no doubt about it.
Yeah, totally agree. I think, what do you think about Tsitsipas' year overall, though, as a whole? Because on the one hand, you look at it and he's finished fourth, just like he did last year, played loads of tournaments, but once again, he's only won 2 titles, and it's the Monte Carlo title and one title on grass, which is it's a good thing. That's a first for him in Mallorca. But, he's lost 5 finals, and, Roland Garros defeats and US Open defeats were slightly disappointing. Obviously, he still has this ongoing stuff with his father, and just, lost early a lot to the same players. Like, he lost twice to Coric, lost to, players like Alcaraz, Rune. I just feel like there's more players now on the tour who can really expose those weaknesses, particularly from his backhand and his return of serve. And I just wonder if, because next year is going to be such a critical year, I feel like, for him, and at least to get back to another major final, or at least he should be doing better at the French. And, no reason why he can't make the second week, at least at the US Open. And I just feel like, while it seems on paper it was a good year, and maybe for anyone else, I think relative to expectations, it was mediocre to poor. What do you think?
It was, because he could easily have ended up finishing higher in the rankings, particularly since Djokovic was beneath him with all the reasons we discussed. That U.S. Open loss was very costly. He should have been going deep into the draw there, and he can't afford to be doing things like that. And he does have to win more finals. There's no doubt about that either. So, and he kept talking early in the year about it. He could see himself getting to 3, getting to 2. Maybe he put too much thought into that instead of just going out and winning the matches, letting the results take care of themselves. And then when the time came, when it's the end of the year, see where you are then. Yeah, in some ways it was a disappointing campaign for him. There were some positives in the sense that he had a couple of wins over Medvedev in Cincinnati. He played a really good semi there, and he beat him again here in a really dramatic match in Turin after he let a couple of match points get away in the second set tiebreak, and Medvedev served for the match in the third against him. He still found a way to win. That was very gritty. So it's nice that he now seems to believe in himself against Medvedev. And so he's made some strides in some areas. And as far as his game, I don't disagree with you. Some work needs to be done there. I don't know if he's ever going to fully solve the problem that he has a very artistic, beautiful backhand, but a shot that can be attacked.
Yeah.
I don't know how he ever fully resolved that, but he definitely can improve and is improving on the volley. And there are times, like in most of the match against Djokovic in Turin, where the serve can be very impressive, and it's maybe an underrated serve. So, I would say he underperformed this year. I agree.
Yeah, and that's because I hold him in such high standards, right? I mean, his forehand is world-class. His transition game is really good. His serve, like you said, is very underrated. So, and he's become a good all-round player. I mean, the tactics that he used against Medvedev in both Cincinnati and here, Medvedev was thrown off a little bit by, and he's turned around that head-to-head somewhat. I mean, it still has to beat him in a hardcourt major, but he's won 4 of their last 6 now, and I do think it's a little more complicated for Medvedev than it used to be. So that will be definitely interesting to see next year. But also on Medvedev his whole year, right? Since the Australian Open final, since that match against Rafa, there's obviously been some outside things that he can't really control, like the hernia surgery, not being able to play Wimbledon, and I don't think his serve has looked right since the hernia operation either. At times, just clusters of double faults in some big moments in matches, and some people, I think, a lot of players are understanding the playbook on how to play him as well. With the deep return position and exposing his awkwardness sometimes at net and things like that, and just a little bit fragile at times closing out matches like we saw this week. Still positive that he's able to play, lose three matches like that in third set tie breaks, having served for the match in 2 of them. But what is your feeling on him for next year? Like, do you think he rebounds from this, and how much better does he get from here, or have we seen the best of him? Because this definitely feels like this was an outlier from the last 3 seasons.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm a little. I got mixed feelings about what's going to happen with him. I mean, he did lose an awful lot of tight matches. In some ways, those losses in Turin, he serves for the match twice. He serves for the match against both Novak and Stefanos and couldn't close out either one. And then he had his chances against Rublev. And that was somewhat symbolic of the year. Too many of the tight ones got away. He didn't adjust that well to a top-of-the-line nick at the U.S. Open and lost to Kyrgios there. Yeah, you may be right. The hernia may have contributed with the serve, but there were times I thought he served really quite well. And so I don't sense it's necessarily a physical issue so much as it's mental with him. But he is something of a head case. And you see him like when he was losing the third set tiebreak to Tsitsipas and lost the first 6 points. And he's just jabbering away and talking to his corner and as if he wants them. It reminded me a bit of Nick, as if he wanted them to sort of go out and solve it for him and play the points for him instead of solve it yourself. Do it yourself. We can't fix it for you. And so there's a little bit of a frantic side to him at times. On the other hand, we know this is a guy that at the end of 2021 and the beginning of 2022 won the U.S. Open and was within striking distance of taking a second straight major in Australia. I still think that match set him back for the whole year. Yeah. Regardless of the hernia operation, regardless of not being allowed to play Wimbledon, I think the Nadal loss had lasting implications. Maybe with a really good start in Australia. I would say Australia may be the key to his whole year. I think he needs to do something pretty big there, to sort of get him to sort of alter his mindset again and get himself thinking the way he was. Because this was definitely not the year that he expected. Just a couple of titles, that's not what standard we expect from him. And even with the time away with the hernia and missing Wimbledon, he still had many, many opportunities winning tournaments. He had a loss to Stan Wawrinka in the fall. He was not the same player that we saw in 2021. And I'm fascinated to see it. As I say, I think Melbourne may be one of the keys to the entire 2023 campaign. I think he needs a really strong showing there at the start of the year.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. And he hasn't made, I would say since in at least the hardcourt majors, the one good thing is that he's been getting to the second week at least, even when he's not been at his best since the 2018 U.S. Open and every hardcourt major. But now I just wonder, with him being seeded 7th, the possibility of drawing one of those top 4 players in the quarters onwards. He's going to have those points to defend, and he might fall even back further. And I don't know what's going to happen with Wimbledon next year and the whole situation there.
Yeah, no, nobody does. Frank, my guess right now, if I had to guess right now, is that Wimbledon will reverse its position and allow these guys to play, because I don't think they want to see this become something that lingers. And I think they saw that the other majors did not support them. They've allowed these players in, so I think they don't want to be on an island here. So I do suspect that Medvedev will be back at Wimbledon, but he's doing some soul searching right now. And for him to finish this year at 7, none of us would have called that. None of us would have believed that at the start of this year. And it will make it difficult in Australia. On the other hand, who knows who he draws in the quarters? It's really kind of hard. And let's just say it was Carlos, and Carlos lost early because he's physically not ready yet. Then you might get a break and play somebody different in the quarters. It could work out okay. But I do believe that tournament will have immense importance to him and his entire outlook for the next year. Yeah,
exactly. Someone who was not at the finals, though, this year was Holger Rune. Just missed it. Obviously, incredible rise by him. Was ranked outside the top 100 to start the year and finished 11. And, obviously just won the Paris Masters, beat 5 top 10 players, saved match points against Stan. And we know how great he's been post-US Open and also earlier during the clay season. And he seems to have one of those really complete games, just like Carlos Alcaraz. And, it just seems like he's for sure going to be here next year. I'm trying to envision how this tournament would have looked like if he actually played it, because Holger is definitely up there, I would say, in terms of players to watch for next year, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you can't have a run like he did in Paris. Granted, obviously, he could have been out of the tournament against Stan. He was fortunate on a couple of match points of Stan missing returns, block returns that should have come back into play. Leave that aside. It was a really spirited, stunning run, and you kind of saw into the future when you watched him, and I believe that he will have a very good chance to be top five in 2023 and go deep into whether he's ready to win a major quite yet. I don't know, but I expect to see him in the latter stages of a couple of majors for sure. And I expect him somewhere in that range of 4 or 5 in the world by the end of next year. It would surprise me if he wasn't. He's a little hot-headed at times.
Yeah.
He's highly emotional, highly charged. He gets very worked up about things, and that was costly at some stages in the middle of this year. He had a slump, and I think part of it was just his disposition. Yeah. But his game is there. There's no denying the talent, and he will be very hard to beat next year, and he'll be in the thick of it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I wanted to get your thoughts as well on the Davis Cup, just in general, what your feelings are about it ever since this format change happened. I just feel like we have an oversaturation now of team events, and also the timing of the year. Granted, the last couple of years we still had Djokovic and Nadal in it, but now we also have the United Cup coming up in January. But what are your feelings of the Davis Cup, having watched so many of those home-away ties in your career covering tennis, and to see where it is right now in one location in Madrid? I mean, sorry, not in Madrid, in Spain, and in one neutral venue like this, having all the teams battle it out for the winner at the end. How does it make you feel?
A little bit saddened. I think I thought it deserved a little more of a spotlight. I mean, I watched a lot of it, enjoyed it tremendously. Thought it was terrific that the Canadians won. The format is really dramatic now because in the old days, it was 2 singles the first day, doubles on Saturday, 2 more singles Sunday, best of 5 in those matches. Now we're best of 3, and it's only the 3 matches between the 2 teams. The doubles becomes even more crucial. And I thought it was very exciting, but a little lost in the shadows. It's late in the year. I don't know how many people are following it. It did have nice coverage on Tennis Channel in the States, which was an improvement over last year, that was the case.
Yeah.
But I still believe Davis Cup deserves more. I don't know what the answer is. I really don't. But I believe it. It should stand alone as the team event. And I still believe the public gets confused at times. They see the Labor Cup. They saw the ATP Cup in the past. Now we're going to have a brand new combined women's, men's team event at the start of next year. And I don't think the public can sort it out. I don't think they fully understand that it was Davis Cup that started in 1900. This was the preeminent and really the only team event and the only thing that mattered. Now it's there, and there was good support for it, and it was a nice last 3 rounds there in Spain, the quarters on, but somehow I believe that the competition should be. I'd like to see it highlighted more in the media, on television, everywhere, and made to be the event that it once was. And that may take some time, and it may take some more tinkering, but I hope it happens.
Yeah, those are all pretty good points about the coverage and just about it being one of the premier events since 1900. I would only just add, they do advertise themselves as like the world, like almost like the World Cup of tennis in a way. And having seen some of the football this week and watching the World Cup, everyone can just plan ahead. They know that it's every 4 years. It's the location is told ahead of time, and it's it is like the biggest event going on. And if tennis could have something like that, I was thinking, instead of having like countries, if we just had a World Cup type thing every 4 years, and you just had like the top players pick, you have like team captains. You have like, let's say Swiatek, world number 1 on the WTA side, picks one female and picks 2 other males or something like that. And you have like a combined World Cup every 4 years. Men and the women compete together, and you make it this huge big thing, almost like a major. I just don't know. It's probably not going to happen, but just something I throw out.
Yeah, and there've been people have looked at it. Sometimes there's been talk about making it more like the Ryder Cup, and maybe you did it every 2 years. 4 years is a little too long a gap for me, I must say. It's certain a player like Djokovic getting on his career or a Nadal might find themselves out of luck and not a part of that. But maybe every 2 years, you definitely need to keep experimenting, keep thinking about what the solution is.
Yeah.
And then this event can become can move beyond itself again to a much higher level.
Yeah, for sure. And then you also have the Olympics every 4 years, so that's another thing. And it's
Right. True.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I mean, lots to digest, lots for our listeners to ponder about as we finish this episode. It was a great way, I think, to wrap this whole season up, Steve. Pleasure having you again. Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Vansh, thanks for having me. It's always enjoyable, and I look forward to the next time we talk.
Yeah, looking forward to it already, Steve.